Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Saving the World Together podcast with Luke Macmichael and Martin Rezny. Today we have Stephen Villee with the Club 75 Alliance as our special guest. We're very excited to hear from him and what his alliance is all about. The new libertarian philosophy or libertarian paradise, or however you want to phrase it. Stephen, welcome so much. Thanks so much for joining us today. Would you like to give us a quick summary of what the Club 75 Alliance is all about?
Sure. What we want to do is let people opt out of income tax. I have here, let's see if you can see it. How about
higher?
Yeah, good like
opting out of income tax. Oh, it's not just for millionaires. That's our slogan. Opting out of income tax. It's not just for millionaires. So if I may, I'd like to ask both of you, what is your immediate reaction to that slogan?
Well, my reaction, I love opting out of income tax for everyone worldwide. I've always been a huge fan of just like land tax, pollution tax, consumption tax only for any company or person worldwide. So I'm 100% on board with opting out of income tax in any way possible. Martin, what do you think?
Well, it's actually the response that's sort of ingrained in me is a bit different because I guess it's because I come from the Union of Soviet European Republics, so known as the European Union. Here, like the idea is like very ingrained that what you should do is like through the taxes or through the income tax to contribute to the mutual amount of money that then the government is supposed to, or I guess trans-governmental structures are supposed to use for all the good stuff like healthcare and education. And so I'm actually very interested in these sort of ways of like sort of how, because in the Czech Republic where I come from, there basically aren't libertarians in terms of like a little bit. There's like I think one small-ish party that maybe represents something like this, but it's never been a big thing here. It's always been either some sort of like obviously communists back in the day, but it's either been like some sort of social democracy or like at most some sort of like a little bit centrist right, like assumedly liberal democracy type thing or neoconservative type thing. But that usually was just in terms of taxes. It wasn't so much like that people won't be paying taxes, but the rich people will get ways how to weasel out of paying stuff while the rest of us will pay the taxes. So my first instinctual reaction, in short, is I'm sort of instinctually opposed to the idea, but I'm definitely open to hearing like how you think it could be done and could work to ultimately still provide a world where things work.
Okay. So the thing I want to emphasize here is we are not saying income tax is bad. We're not saying nobody should have any income tax. All we're saying is there are a few million people who really don't like income tax, and we want just those people to be free of income tax. And the rest of you have your income tax. That's the gist of it. But then remember, the second part of the slogan is it's not just for millionaires. So what we're saying implicitly there is a couple of things. First, income tax is something that some people want to opt out of. And secondly, that millionaires are already doing it. Right. And we want the same privilege. Okay?
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay, now I want to make sure that we understand what we mean, who we're talking about when we talk about the millionaires who opt out of income tax. Some people think we're talking about this guy here, George Soros. There was an article that came out in ProPublica a while ago saying, well, there are all these rich people, there are these billionaires who they're able to not pay income tax for a few years. And one of the people mentioned was George Soros. For 3 years, he managed not to pay any income tax. What we're saying is that's not the millionaires we're talking about. What we're talking about is, I don't know, maybe it would, anyway, these two guys, John Templeton and Eduardo Severin. Have you heard of either of them? John Templeton, he started the Templeton Foundation, heard of that?
Yeah, sounds vaguely familiar.
Prize. Okay, and then Eduardo Severin, he was the co-founder of Facebook.
Right.
And he actually made the news at the time he renounced his US citizenship. But that's what we're talking about. So for us, today, the way you opt out of income tax is you move to a country that has no income tax, like Monaco. Or the Bahamas, and you renounce your US citizenship. Both of these guys did exactly that. And what we're saying a couple of things. First, it's relatively easy for millionaires to do that, but for various practical reasons, it's difficult for ordinary folks to do that. And we just want to, what we want to do specifically is get a whole bunch of people who don't like income tax to move to New Hampshire until we're a majority there, and then push for peaceful secession so that we turn New Hampshire into a place that's like Monaco, except you don't have to be a millionaire to move there.
Makes sense.
All right.
Interesting.
Any comments on that?
Any questions so far? I can.
Well, actually, maybe a comment more so
Yeah.
than a question. When I sort of hear this more extended explanation, it actually makes more sense to me now. One of the ideas that I sort of like, or maybe I think it must be way of the future, ideally should be way of the future, is like if person believes in a free market as a principle, then there's definitely some argument to be made for some sort of like a free market of like nationalities. Or like places to like because one of the things that I actually personally don't like is that like you're very tied, or people on planet Earth are very tied to like the nationality of the place where they were born. And I generally don't like when people have their lives determined by something that has nothing to do with them, like a happenstance of birth. So on like from this angle, I definitely like it. Like that's actually for me like a strong ethical sort of grounding for this sort of arrangements. If, like you say, it's about it being optional and it's not about trying to like abolish taxes or just like flatly just cancel them, but it's about what the individual people would like to do. For instance, another argument that I like that's related to this is like I don't like that in the tax package, sort of like what you pay for, you don't really have a lot of control over. Like it's not that big of a deal necessarily where I live, I believe, because Czech Republic doesn't generally go like wage wars for like trillions of dollars to random places. So I'm not super dissatisfied with how Czech Republic specifically is spending tax money. But if I were living, for instance, in the United States, I might actually have a bit of an issue with the fact that like a lot of the money that I'm paying is like goes to things that I not support, but like directly oppose. So for me, I guess like the interesting arguments are the sort of political philosophical arguments about like the sort of political rights of people. So I'm liking this so far, but for me I still would like to hear like how you think like economically like how that would work, or what sort of implications that would have on that end.
And just to say it simply, what do people have to give up in order to pay no income taxes? Obviously, there's the government or the society, and not just the government, but the corporations or the law or everything that runs society, whether it's government or not. Somebody's making the laws and making the roads and making the schools and hospitals and police forces and everything that makes society tick. Something's got to pay for that.
I have two words for you: positive rights. Are you familiar with positive rights as opposed to negative rights?
I am, yes. I have some questions about them, but go ahead and explain them for anyone who.
A right is positive if it costs the government money. So an example of a negative right is freedom of religion. It doesn't cost the government money to provide freedom of religion. They just have to get out of the way and let you worship the way you like. Whereas to make sure that you have enough food, to make sure that your housing is okay, to make sure that you have enough health care, that costs money. And as you say, that money has to come from somewhere. And that's why positive rights are more of an economic problem than negative rights are. So what we're going to require of anyone who, once New Hampshire becomes an independent republic, our one and only immigration requirement is that you agree no positive rights for you ever. You are giving up positive rights. And we're pretty sure that with just other taxes, our tax structure will stay pretty much as it is. Property tax is the main one. We have some business taxes and a whole bunch of fees, like our car registration is pretty high compared to other states. But we are already providing the services you mentioned, roads, just police, all that basic stuff just from other taxes. What we're basically saying is that income tax is very, very different from other taxes. And the key point is that it benefits the majority at the expense of a minority. And I have a chart. Let's see if you can see this. So what we're saying is that if you compare income tax to just about any other kind of tax, there is a majority who would be paying less, which are these guys here,
Yeah.
and the minority that is paying more is approximately Club 75. Club 75 means people whose income is 75,000 or higher. Okay, is that a believable statement when I put it that way?
Absolutely. There's always that inflection point where,
Right.
you know, and all tax is kind of, in my mind, taxes, the whole purpose of it is to try to encourage good behavior and provide the necessities of society. So there's like
Okay.
incentives, you know, with taxing or subsidizing certain kinds of things that you want good stuff for society in some ways, right?
So what you're
What I
basically,
am
but
trying
just what you're basically
Okay,
saying
go
is
ahead.
that even when like the rate is the same for everybody, then it's still kind of progressive because the people who make more
good
pay
point.
more of it.
Actually, I wanted to ask you about that, Martin. Okay, so here in the United States, we have a very progressive tax structure. There's like 5 tax brackets. And correct me if I'm wrong, Luke, in Canada, there's, maybe it's
Even
only
more.
4.
Yeah, our income tax in Canada is almost twice of what it is in the States. We do get
And part of it is that you have a lot of provincial tax, right? You know, here in the United States, New Hampshire is one of 9 states that have no state income tax at all, whereas in Canada, every province, and actually your province, Ontario, is one of the lower ones with the top tax rate is only 13%, right?
Right.
So yeah, you got it bad there. And Martin, so what I wanted to ask you is, as I understand it, in Czech Republic, it was a flat tax up until about 2 years ago. Am I right about that? And then they added, it was 15%. Okay, go ahead.
Well, actually, I'm not an expert on local tax law because like economics is not one of my primary areas of interest. But I believe it's something like that. I believe it's been flat or mostly flat, but might be different. But might be different now.
Okay, so to answer your question, I would say that the more progressive an income tax is, the more what I said is true, that it benefits the majority who have low income, and it hurts the people who are above 75,000 who, or whatever the corresponding amount is in your local currency. But but I actually believe that even if it was just a flat tax, you would there would still be a majority paying less under even a flat tax than under just about any other kind of tax. So one of the things I'm trying to get across to libertarians, and I don't think they're getting it, is income tax is not some evil plot. It's not a nefarious plot by the Illuminati or anything. It's just voters being human. Eventually the majority figures out that, hey, an income tax works well for me, so I'm going to vote for it. And what that implies is, as you may know, there's actually several secession efforts here in New Hampshire, and there's a bunch of people chomping at the bit to secede. And what I want to impress on them is, I don't want to secede yet, because if they did, you would eventually just get an income tax again, because as long as the majority is still benefiting from income tax, they're going to say, hey, let's vote on whether to have an income tax in this new Republic of New Hampshire. And guess what? They're going to have it. And all the same things that libertarians don't like about big government are going to come back again. That's why I want to wait until we have this concentration of Club 75 folks in New Hampshire before we secede.
Okay, so let's think about that a little bit. So just kind of one of the biggest kind of worries from all of this is that you get kind of an elite class. You're trying to build a kind of a state or a country with, let's say, only wealthy people, or only wealthy people who don't want to pay income tax because they're in that wealthy country, right? So you're trying to kind of almost exclude in some ways, maybe the disabled or the poor that just don't have those kinds of incomes. And I know I read your thing, and I understand that you're not trying to kick anybody out. You're just trying to bring in enough new people that it's the majority. But then over time, people who don't have that kind of income or not benefiting from the no income tax will either move away or they'll pass away and die off. So you'll be left with kind of a whole society of all hardworking, kind of wealthy people, I guess you could say, that don't need the positive rights because they're all self-sustaining, self-supporting, hardworking, bootstrap individuals, right? Is that kind of the goal, the general goal? You want to see only people?
I will say there are many people, even within the Free State Project. I haven't talked about the Free State Project yet, but there are a whole lot of people that I know are libertarians whose income is below 75,000. So many people oppose income tax just on philosophical principles, even though they would technically benefit from having it. And of course, they are most welcome. They would be most welcome in New Hampshire.
Interesting. Okay, so I have a couple more questions about positive rights.
Okay.
Because again, this is, I think some of it's gray, a little bit gray. So let's just talk a little bit about positive rights. So we have the basic things like education. Okay. So I noticed that you say no public education of any kind.
Right.
So it's just
except for the loyalists.
For the loyalists, yeah. Right. For the new. Let's just kind of assume we'll fast forward 50 or 100 years to kind of,
all right,
the paradisical dream that we have for this and what it looks like. And I'm trying to kind of envision that in my head and what it might look like long term.
Okay.
So no public education, no welfare of any kind,
right?
No social security net, no forced savings of any kind. So basically what happens is that people can't support themselves for any reason, and they can't get either a family member or charity or church of some kind to help them out through their downtime.
Right.
You're basically encouraging them to either move away to some other place that will take them in, or I think on your side, I mean, just say simply, you're asking.
It's suicide. That's the word. That's
suicide,
the word. Okay. All right.
Right.
Essentially, yes.
It's a hot topic. You're kind of encouraging them, or you're encouraging an atmosphere where that's socially acceptable to commit suicide if you can't support yourself.
Essentially, yes.
That's correct. Okay. So if people didn't want to commit suicide, would you have the death penalty in some cases, or would you just lock them up? Or, if they chose to steal to survive versus committing suicide, what would be your feeling there in general?
These are good questions. Okay, I want to start by saying, before you even move to New Hampshire, we just make sure you really understand what you're getting into. There is a risk here, as you say. There's a risk that you. Okay, so if you've said yes, you signed the waiver, said yes, I'm accepting the risk, and you become destitute anyway. I'm not really a fan of the death penalty, but I am in favor of corporal punishment. So, if you steal, the punishment has to be, it shouldn't be the death penalty, but it should be some kind of harsh corporal punishment so that you don't get food. So you realize stealing doesn't help. It just gets you a bunch of pain.
Okay. So would you have like the prison system be very, minimal, like you would get 3 meals a day, you get like bread and water kind of thing? Kind of take it back to the ancient days of really making it punishment versus.
I would try to avoid jail time as a punishment for stealing, because it creates exactly the problem you're talking about, where you have to feed them anyway. So so that's why I would rather have corporal punishment instead of jail time. So jail time should be for people who did what we call real crimes, like
murder, rape,
that kind.
Murder, rape, property theft, I guess. So okay, that's interesting. What do you think, Martin? Are you do you have any questions? I still have some questions bouncing around in my head. What's your opinion on this?
Yeah, that's sounds. I'm not gonna lie, it sounds a bit harsh. Although, like, I do get the idea of it being something that the person just, because that's the thing. If it's a person who like moved there willingly and a deal was presented to them, like, I do understand like this. I mean, like, personally, I guess I've just grown up in the society that's just too socialist. I like just have some sort of like intuitions that like that some sort of safety net is okay. And definitely like I would prefer that over like a corporal punishment. But the thing is, if you had a scenario where there's a place where people can willingly go and accept these terms as some sort of contract, then like I do understand and respect that sort of philosophy for people who are into that. I think that's the way I would put it. The question then I would have is like, what would happen if like a person who did this moved into like a state, and again was a thing based on just happenstance of birth? What if they had children that were born in that state who didn't opt into that system technically? Like how would you treat people who didn't willingly entered into that sort of contract but were born into it? Again, I believe it's the same issue as that you're kind of trying to solve in a way.
Right. So children is a big problem. We do talk about it We talk about children in the loyalist chapter. So there's really two categories. There's children of loyalists, and then there's children of secessionists. Let's talk about children of loyalists first. We're offering to pay for relocation to anyone who wants to move elsewhere. And if you're a child of a loyalist, you can claim U.S. citizenship. You understand that, right? Because your parents are citizens, even though you were born outside of the United States, there is actually a law that says you can claim your citizenship, and you just have to do it before you turn 18. So you have the option of claiming your U.S. citizenship. Then you don't have to go through immigration or anything. You're already a U.S. citizen. You can move to any state, U.S. state you want to, and we'll pay for your relocation. So that shouldn't be a problem. Now let's talk about.
Oh, sorry, I'm just jumping in. What if they were to eventually take that away? If you did succeed, they might take that away, right? They might not consider.
You think so?
I would think they would. Yeah, I mean, I think they'd be a little bitter about you succeeding, to be honest. And they would say, okay, you don't want to be U.S. You don't get any of the perks of being U.S. We don't want your rejects. They might say, right? Might. Like I think it's very high chance. What do you think, Martin?
Well, you mean
bear in mind these are children of loyalists.
Understood, but the loyalists are the ones that essentially gave up. And did they have to give up their U.S. citizenship to go to New Hampshire? And when they succeed, would you be giving up your U.S. citizenship?
We would, but the loyalists would not.
So when you say loyalists, like, okay, maybe it should be defined for us viewers.
Yeah.
So who's a loyalist and who's a secessionist in this situation?
Okay, the loyalists are people who just happened to be living in New Hampshire when the libertarians took over and asked to secede.
Right.
They are innocent bystanders. Right?
Okay,
they just happen to be there. So their children, I would hope, the U.S. government would welcome them.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, understood. So now then, children of secessionists. Let's move.
Okay, that's okay. Now you're absolutely right that the U.S. government might say, well, hey, you're not a U.S. citizen, so you got to go through the line just like everybody else. Right. Meaning, if you're a child of a secessionist, you're going to have to make your mind up before you get too old that you really like positive rights, and you're going to have to move somewhere else, and you're going to have to go through immigration like everybody else.
Which might be very hard.
It might be, and it certainly will be. The later you wait in your life, the harder it will be. But if you apply right when you turn 18 or right when you turn 21, hopefully it won't be too bad. You may not get into the United States, but you could try Canada. You could try, yeah.
Well, in this case, because I am still concerned, like even for children of the secessionists, because they still didn't make the choices of their parents, and I'm personally not a fan of like a sort of a North Korean style, like a whole family gets punished for the sins of the like one person in the family type situation. I know it's like it's not sort of intentional in the situation, but if you're a child of somebody who made a choice and then failed, became destitute in a state where that's basically game over, and you are their child, then and the state doesn't really necessarily have would you have something like child services or some way of dealing with this in your vision of the state? We would. The point is, we would encourage them to think early on. The point is, you want to move somewhere else before you become destitute.
Right. So, okay. I think that's the major difference between there and North Korea is you're encouraging anyone who doesn't like it to move away. Of course, there's trying to help them. Yeah, I just meant like the sort of the whole principle of collective punishment is still kind of applies a little bit to this situation, even though it's a unique way of this conundrum arising. Like, I understand you would encourage it. I'm just saying stuff happens. Like, I imagine there would be people who just thought to the very last second that they would be sorted out, and then they just something went awry, and then had to go bankrupt or whatever, and their children would be just caught in that situation. I imagine might not be a super common scenario, but I imagine it's a scenario that might arise. And if you are willing, for instance, to pay them to help them to move somewhere else, then of course, if they happen to have American citizenship, that would be fairly easy. So I would consider that an actual solution in that situation. If they don't, then what I believe would make this sort of utopia that you're trying to build, or maybe utopia is not the right word, because it sort of has these connotations of it's unrealistic. I'm not trying to say that it's unrealistic. It's just whatever vision of a future state you have. So maybe I think it would be better idea or more functional in a world where moving around and shopping for citizenship would be easier. So actually, I would find that a much more acceptable sort of regime or a solution or system
if the whole world actually in that future, in like the next 50 years, moved in the direction of like that sort of global mobility is a bit less of an issue than it is now, then it would make more sense to me.
Okay.
And Rutger Bregman, his book Utopia for Realists, the main three things were to encourage freedom of individuals, to have the ability to move around. You need some kind of open border policy where people could just go to wherever country they wanted easily. Some kind of worldwide, let's call it basic dividend, which is kind of your universal basic amount of the commons. It's your share of the commons, essentially, is kind of an important minimum, just to make sure you've got some basic kind of ability to educate yourself and work and feed yourself with the commons that are provided: water, air, land, to some extent. So those are kind of some basics, and then some kind of, I think his other one was 15-hour work week, and to ensure there was enough work to go around, because the AI is going to be doing a lot of it in the future. So we kind of have to cut back a little bit on work, maybe, to ensure that there's enough usable or valuable work to go around, perhaps. Those are some of the interesting concepts that I think could help something like this, if the whole world were kind of to somewhat adopt it as a policy of just allowing people to go wherever made sense to them.
Do you see, I mean, I know it's hard to predict these things, but do you see immigration requirements generally becoming more strict over the next 20, 30 years, or be staying about the same? Or
personally, I'm kind of a hopeful kind of guy, and you kind of have to be when you're running a Saving the World Together website. You have to be somewhat hopeful that we're going to have some effect here. So I'd love to say that, yeah, I think it makes sense for us to have an open immigration, particularly if we can kind of get worldwide laws and rules of basic human rights. What should the positive rights be? And this is kind of where the positive rights kind of come into effect. Should people have the right for land? Should people have the right to be able to work and educate themselves? Should people have the right to a decent job or decent living and not be a slave to a monopoly or an oligarchy or whatever it might be? Should people have the right to not be abused and enslaved, right? So these are complicated issues, and they're a little gray in many ways. You look at China and India and some of the child labor laws and some of these other kinds of things that are kind of libertarian in some ways, but also kind of, enslaving. Wage slavery is obviously a big thing in many parts of the world.
Well, actually, I would like to also answer this question a little bit, like between the two of us, and it's not just because of the colors of our shirts. I am the more pessimistic one, and how pessimists like to think of themselves more realistic. The sort of vision for the near future, I believe, is that the immigration will definitely become a bigger problem. That could be for a variety of reasons, but the main one allegedly would be if there is some sort of climate change going on, then the most likely outcome is that more people will be displaced, and therefore more people will need to move somewhere else in the world. But there could be many different reasons for that. Like if you just have escalating conflicts like in Russia or in Ukraine or Israel, then like more conflicts like this in some sort of global geopolitical conflagration also would produce more refugees or people who are displaced and need to move somewhere else. So I believe that there's like a crossroads geopolitically in the near future of like the next 20, 30 years, because a decision will need to be made. And generally speaking, the decision could either be everybody sort of builds up defenses and closes borders and will try to repel everyone, or, which I believe is actually more constructive solution to this issue, is that like a new geopolitical framework will be developed where moving people around the globe will become less of an issue legally, or in terms of like something like nationality. Because if you think about it, like it's these sort of nationalistic concepts like borders that are like strictly not permeable. That's actually, it's just an abstract theoretical construct. Like there's no reason for that to keep existing if the reality changes to a point where it's impractical. So people, I believe, still can make the wrong, dumb decision and try to just, build the walls or whatever and make everything work worse in the world. But I think there is a chance that a more rational response would be taken to become more internationalistic or more liberal. There's actually two different ways of framing that choice. Like you could either go that we actually move toward more of a global government where therefore nationalistic borders become less important, or we go more in a liberal or libertarian direction where we sort of just stop caring about these nationalistic constructs and do more of a free market of of belonging to a place in the world. So I believe there are possibilities. So I think it's possible, but it's also, I think, equally possible that it actually will become more of a problem. Is my
What do you think,
take.
Stephen? What would you?
Obviously, I would.
Or would you like to see more of an open border?
I would love, well, for sure, I would like to have open borders between New Hampshire and the United States, just like there is open borders between Monaco and France. I don't know if you've ever visited Monaco, but you can, and as well, it's effectively now part of the Schengen area. You can go from Monaco to pretty much everywhere in Europe without having to show a passport or anything. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Other people disagree with me, but I think it's a beautiful thing. So I'd love to see more of that.
No, we're definitely in agreement there. And I think that the more safe the world is, and kind of the more open-minded it is to people doing what they want to do, and live and let live, and don't control or hurt one another. I think the more receptive we'll be to open borders as a global.
I actually think that the more unsafe the world is, the more this open border thing might become a necessity. So maybe it actually would make sense for different reasons in both versions of the future.
I do feel like it's utopia or oblivion to some extent, that if we don't fix this issue and fix this kind of, particularly the warlike stuff, the whole water wars and environmental wars and religious wars that are going to come if we don't solve the issue. And I think open borders is something that could solve the issue if you do it right. You don't like where you are, move somewhere else. You don't like living in Gaza, move somewhere else. There's an open border there, and just pick up what you like, and you'll only be left with people that are happy with their current state. And if the government's left with no people to govern, then that's their own fault for having poor government.
There's actually one more reason why an opening of borders and loosening of sort of national requirements might occur, and that's demographics, because the whole world was scared with overpopulation to a point where we started entering a demographic collapse instead. So there's actually what might happen in places that are traditionally very locked in, like specifically China. Could be that they actually hit such demographic problems in terms of the age population distribution that they would be actually very open to any immigrants that are of like a younger age brackets to just fix their demographics, and might actually arrive at it being a necessity for them to keep functioning as sort of like economic entities. So it might be actually even like this additional reason, specifically like 20, 30 years from now, why the countries might decide to take in a lot more people or make it much easier to move between nationalities.
All that said, I think this could work very well as long as people have easy exit rights and they have other options to choose from. If ever people are locked in and kind of they have nowhere else to go and they're destitute, and you're kind of say, well, here's a pill, and that is a bit of a not a great scenario.
Feels a bit dystopian. Feels a bit like Soylent Green type the 70s hard sci-fi thing.
Yeah. 100%. And I would not like to see that anywhere in the world. I don't think it exists anywhere in the world now, and I would not like to see that where disabled people or destitute people are handed a pill.
Actually, so let me ask you about this. In Switzerland, as you may be aware, it is legal to commit suicide even if you don't have a terminal disease. How do you feel about that?
I personally, I'm okay with that as long as they've kind of had a certain amount of mental health help.
Right.
Personally, as long as they're reasonable sound in mind. My mother went through a lot of challenges with cancer, and I definitely know there's lots of terminal issues that I think everyone should have the choice to kind of reject help at some point and say, okay, I've had enough, I'm ready to go. So I'm okay with that, but there's definitely a gray area there where if people are of sound mind, and that's a lot of people say no one of sound mind would choose to take their own life, so they can't be of sound mind. So that's kind of the gray area where it's personally, I also generally support the right to euthanasia. Basically, I just think that there's the important caveat is like as long as people are not being pressured into taking that option. Exactly. So if you have it like as an option, like as like a just basically deciding like nope, and just like as long as it's really a free decision. And I probably should be like with you're buying a gun, I have to wait a month before they give you the gun. Like bit of it's like a take some time the process, so that it's not a snap decision. That's therefore suspect just on the grounds of like how
little time there was to reflect on the decision before it was sort of executed, to use a term. So in this sense, I would support it. I really think that in specifically, like so far, in the sort of your vision of the system in the future, I really just like have a just maybe an outstanding issue with like I said, with the people who didn't specifically sign a contract and just happen to, because of choices of others, happen to be pushed into a bad situation without necessarily having like a very good systemic options to deal with it. That's like the one thing that I think for me is something that requires some sort of solution that's not, it's like euthanasia. That is just, or just extreme, but that like it's more of a taken care of thing.
Let's talk a little bit about the disabled, I think, because I think there's definitely a lot of room for this kind of thing. I have two brothers. One has Down syndrome, another has central processing disorder that are both disabled, and they've been living off kind of disability for many years very well in Canada. So in this system, would you propose no disability checks as well? It's basically just up to their family and church to kind of take them in essentially. So if their family dies, once their parents are gone, what would happen to the disabled children?
They can try appealing to voluntary charity. And now, I guess I would say, if even with no income tax, if the majority vote through the democratic process that we're going to make an exception for truly disabled people, we're going to provide an option for them, as long as there are few enough of those cases that they can afford it without an income tax, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But what I would like to do, I would still want them to, as part of immigration, get it like drilled into their mind. Do not expect any positive rights at all. If you get any, it's like
it's a bonus.
A bonus, a surprise. Yes.
Sure.
But don't expect it. Don't deem it as the gift.
Yeah.
Although like I guess just logically speaking, if you build a society from people who are generally able to make a lot of money, or are definitely capable of making money, then maybe you could have a system where the charities are actually functional. In that, like, where like exactly I could be expected higher than normal level of this kind of communal or community-based services.
I mean, the perfect example I have, obviously, I have a background in the Mormon faith, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and what they've always done for 200 years is have a church welfare system, where essentially anybody anywhere can kind of go to the church and say, okay, I'm a little short this week, I can't pay for food, and the church will basically give you food, but they will kind of require that you do some work or help with the lawn or help with the snow removal, or they're trying to enable people to do certain things. So even disabled people can do at least something typically. And if they can't, then the church will usually just help them anyway. So it comes down to the charitable organizations and the religious organizations to do that welfare job and to basically take it away from the government and put it to the individuals, which can work very well as long as the society is kind of built up that way, and that expectation is there, that you have somewhere to go, somewhere to turn to where you don't have to starve or thieve or do bad things in order to get fed if you are having trouble.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm not entirely against it, but I definitely am wary of the fact that maybe it could collapse on itself if too many people need help. If the world kind of collapses in on itself, and say environmental issues get worse and worse, and water runs dry, and people just have very little to turn to, then it could become chaotic, and it could potentially blow up in your face.
Although if you like you said, if like you said, there will be all other kinds of taxes, then maybe it's just a question of like if the need is identified, then specific tax for that would be something like. So what do you think about like this kind of solving of like issues on a case-by-case basis, like basically voting for case-by-case taxes?
Right. Yeah. Or even, I mean, there's nothing to stop the legislature from saying, okay, we're going to have positive rights for people who are disabled in this way, and we're just going to pay for it out of the general fund.
Right.
You
might have to,
if the general fund is big enough, you can do that.
And maybe you have to increase property taxes a little bit, or
yeah.
right? Like you can increase the certain taxes you have. You might have a sales tax of some kind. You might have a property tax of some kind. Just no income tax, which is again what I said is I'm against all income tax. I think it disincentivizes work of all kind. And I think work is a good thing for many reasons, not just the fact that it produces, but it's good for your health as well. Okay, so I don't think any kind of tax work.
Maybe just then from my sort of socialist area, there's like the main argument actually for even progressive taxes from like social democratic parties. And so like would like to hear your opinion on it then. Is that, as far as I understand it, is that actually is a good thing that the people who make more money pay more because they don't feel it as much. Like the logic is that like you can't sort of raise taxes on the sort of people who make less money, or that some sort of like amount of money is like the maximum amount of money that you can even get from just like regular working person before they will start getting trouble just putting food on the table or pay the energy bill or whatever. But even if you like take like a significantly higher percentage from somebody who makes significantly lot more money, then like basically they can never be put in a position that they would struggle in any basic way in terms of like food, shelter, energy, but basically anything that they need as a person. Like they would still should have way enough money left over. So like what do you think about this kind of argumentation?
That is the general argument, and what we're saying is for most people that is a persuasive argument, and that's why they should have an income tax. But for a small minority, which is basically Club 75, they say, yeah, but we would rather it be a voluntary charity thing. So that's why we want to opt out. We want to concentrate ourselves in New Hampshire and say, you guys do your thing, we'll do our thing.
Okay. So let's change gears for a sec here. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the regulation rights, because this is the other kind of major issue I have with libertarian philosophy in general, is the no regulation of corporations, particularly monopolies and pollution in general.
Okay.
Now I've read a little bit about this, but I kind of wanted to get your take on it. Do you think pollution should be regulated at all? Should nuclear waste?
I will say I am a moderate libertarian, which means I pretty much just care about income tax. Other things, I'm unlike all my libertarian friends. I don't really care about gun rights. I don't really care too much about what you're talking about, regulation of companies. As long as you can do it without an income tax, I'm okay with it.
Okay.
Now, that being said, the people who move to New Hampshire will typically be libertarians, hardcore libertarians, who will probably say, no, we don't want to have regulations. Now, as regarding pollution, it's a good question. I don't have a good answer there, which is why I kind of want to stay neutral and just say, okay, you guys duke it out.
And that's the one that most libertarians don't typically have a good answer for. And I've met many in the past, have really, really good friends. And I really, understand a lot of what they're trying for, but you got to come down to the actual how it's going to implement, and what it will actually look like if the whole world were to adopt this kind of policy, or even just a significant chunk of areas. All the polluting companies in the world would potentially move there if there was no regulation, and then they would either just pollute all the rivers and streams beyond repair, or just dump it all in the ocean, and then the whole world kind of has to deal with it. There's some major issues there that I feel companies need to be regulated, at least to some extent, and I don't think they really.
If I may, I've just recently, one of the things I've been working on is creating courses for journalists, and one of the last things that I've been specifically reading up on was how it actually came to be in the United States that a whole bunch of the regulatory legislation was passed. And it all actually started when there actually was a laissez-faire period, like very unregulated capitalistic period at the turn of the 19th and 20th century in the United States, where the corporations were basically allowed to do whatever. And what happened was the whole muckrakers movement of the investigative journalists who kept sort of uncovering all the externalities or all the negative consequences of there being no regulations, and then usually making enough people sufficiently angry about it that some legislation was voted for or passed because it was such a big issue for so many people that that sort of forced the regulation to exist. It was basically that when people found out the stuff that was happening and when they didn't like it, then they pushed for legislation. So I imagine that even if you try to run this kind of experiment again and have a very libertarian place, I imagine that something like this would happen anyway. Like if what happened was that some abuses were happening that were unacceptable to most people, then as soon as most people living there would learn about them, then if you're still a democracy, I imagine they would still vote for regulatory legislation.
Yeah, if the smell gets bad enough, vote to,
once enough of your kids and your friends' kids get cancer, from the toxic waste in your backyard. But I do think that they don't really address it enough. And I think we've got this historical precedent and the lessons from the no regulation already. And I wish libertarians would kind of be a little more, cognizant of some of those historical facts as far as no regulation. And I wish it was more of the conversation. I really love what you're doing, Stephen. And I think it is very doable if you have kind of enough property tax and enough other taxes to kind of ensure that some level of regulation is there. And hopefully it's a worldwide regulation, so people can't just, bring all their pollution to the dirtiest places that have no regulation, which is what's happening now. That's really the main problem with all of the world pollution now, is you've got the dirtiest countries that are welcoming it, and all the countries that are outsourcing their pollution and their slave labor type of policies to countries that allow it. We definitely need some kind of worldwide cooperation on that, and I'm hoping NATO or the UN or all these groups can kind of realize that that's kind of the source of many of our economic and political and religious woes, is the fact that we're exporting our problems to other countries. We're exporting our externalities and our negative corporate externalities to other places like Africa and China and India, and they don't want our garbage anymore. They don't. China's not taking our plastic anymore. They were taking our recyclable plastic for years. They don't want it anymore. So we've got to find other places to dump it. And
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, no, these are major world issues that are kind of the core of many of these problems. So anyway, I would just like to see a little more of that.
So maybe a question for Stephen then. So if you imagine like a sort of ideal vision of the future, if there actually happened to be some sort of a libertarian global order, which is sort of a bit of an oxymoron because it wouldn't be like a global government or anything, but like so in your opinion, like if you were to like had magical power to, like Luke tends to ask people, like if you had like a magical power to just like decide what the world would be like, so it's like, what do you think it would look like in this sort of perfect or very good libertarian future if most places in the world adopted libertarianism?
Let me just start by saying I don't see libertarianism becoming any significant portion of the world going libertarian. But the whole point here, and this is where I break ranks with many libertarians say, like the Free State Project is going to be a shining example of how the rest of the world can adopt libertarian thinking, and it'll be one. I disagree with that. I think because of this whole business of giving up positive rights, which is not for most people, I don't see. I see it being a very small percent of the world that becomes libertarian.
Okay.
And if you were to give me the godlike power to just become dictator of the world and say, this is how we're going to make the world wonderful, I would give up that power. I would say, I don't want to be deciding.
That's not a valid answer. Most people don't want the power, but the question still stands. Somebody has to make the decision, even if it's.
I would say I will let other people make the decision.
But yeah, that's okay. We'll let you get away with it, but it's just to be clear, it's not
we
about.
We should let the libertarian get away with it, because like that's really very on brand. But no, I do like it. I do like the idea. It's sort of like a sensible libertarianism, because I think like from like my sort of political philosophy background, I have like learned a lot about this type of philosophy and what it looks like in practice. And also about people who profess it or who try to politically enact it somewhere. And like my main criticism would be like that libertarians oftentimes tend to be like very much on the idealist end of the spectrum of political philosophy, and usually they want to push it to an extreme, or at least they argue that they want to push it to an extreme where it seems unreasonable for it to be able to work on like such like a large enough scale, or to like in an extreme enough manifestation or in extreme enough implementation. So I sort of like this idea that like maybe the ideal future for libertarianism is that there are libertarian places in the world. that like it's a thing somewhere in the world where people who want it can go. Like I do like that that vision of libertarianism.
Okay.
And I would say the exact same thing, as long as they're not exporting their pollution or problems or their rejects, let's say, to other areas, which is, I think, potentially a big issue with Hampshire, theoretically. If
as long as they're not Captain Planet villains.
State, the Captain Planet villains. If the surrounding states would get their regulatory problems from them having no regulation on water pollution or whatever, or even air pollution, the other surrounding states are going to get problems from that, and they would probably attack you and conquer you if it got bad enough, right? And so those are significant issues that need to be thought about, early on before you succeed.
So switching gears just for a minute, I'd like to talk about secession generally, because it's for many libertarians, what they tell me is, yeah, this is all great, Steve, but you'll never get secession. And so I want to talk a little bit about prospects for secession. Actually, Martin, since you are in Czech Republic, I don't know how old you are, but I presume that in 1991 you were alive. And so I'd like to ask you, what was the Velvet Revolution or Velvet Divorce like for you?
Well, I was teeny tiny at that time.
How old were you? Okay.
I was born in 1987, so I was like, didn't really understand anything.
4 years old. Okay, 5 years old.
So but I obviously heard and learned a lot about it, and like every couple of years, they basically play the television broadcasts from those in important days, like on repeat the whole day. So that basically you can get some sort of immersive sense of what it was like. And I'm actually quite a fan. Like, so to answer the question of like realisticness of a secession, like Czechoslovakian example is an example that you can absolutely do, like democratic, voluntary, peaceful transition that causes basically no harm or destruction. The question is if it's possible outside of Czechoslovakia, because I think a component of why it happened this way is that we're, like both Czechs and Slovaks, we're extremely pacifistic nations. Like we've always been, like even when everybody was sort of war crazy before the Second World War period, we were the so-called island of democracy. Like the Czechoslovakia was the last pacifistic state, like liberal democratic state in the whole region. So it's something a little bit to do with our culture, but also it's really is entirely doable, because if you believe that if you have a functional democracy where you can people can decide stuff and it happens, like in all kinds of places in Europe, like similarly big decision was joining the European Union. Or the case of Brexit, leaving the European Union. That's basically the same level of decision. And if you just happen to have a functional democracy, then you should have the ability to do something like a referendum and then just honor the result of the referendum. So I think the difference in the United States, why it's a bit more complicated, is something to do with Americans like guns and the sort of American nationalism, which is a bit extreme. So there are cultural differences that make it more difficult. But in terms of like general political science, this stuff can be done. You just kind of have to be chill about it.
So Luke, I'd like to ask you about 1995, which is, as you may know, that is when Quebec almost got a referendum for secession, and
I was going to bring that up. I was.
Okay, so what was that like for you? How old were you? And
I was I think only about 1991. I was about 20 at the time. So it well, actually I was a little younger. I was maybe 14, but I remember it happening. I remember the vote happening. And it was a big thing. It was a massive deal, particularly because it was going to cut our country right in half. The maritime provinces where I grew up in Nova Scotia were going to get cut off from the rest of Canada. We would have had to have been two separate nations, which I don't know if there's anywhere else in the world that has that, where you have a nation that's kind of divided by a big block in the middle.
Funny you should mention that, because New Hampshire would be splitting Massachusetts from Maine.
Exactly. So
and actually Alaska is separate from everything.
Quebec is absolutely huge. It's close to a third of Canada landmass wise. It goes right up to the North Pole. So it was an absolute huge thing, and it was very close. I think it was like 51% to 49% or something. And we were all extremely worried that it would make it very complicated to to even travel from one part of Canada to the other to go see our
Okay.
family.
All right. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, but it didn't happen, thankfully, in my opinion. I can't imagine how complicated it would have been, economically, passport wise, to try to, divide the country that way. And I feel like I'm really glad it didn't happen, but it definitely could have. We would have gone through it. We would have figured it out had that vote gone 1% the other way. I think Quebec might have struggled very much like Britain is struggling a little bit right now with Brexit. They always think the grass is greener on the other side. At the end of the day, I feel like separating is not necessarily a good solution to anything. I feel like a marriage, right? You could typically work out your differences and make it work.
Actually, I feel I have to interject, like as a Czechoslovakian that's no longer Czechoslovakian. In this case, I think now I sort of makes it more sense to me why it worked here. It was not a one-sided separation. It was basically mutually agreed upon separation, at least on the level of the political elite. So that helps if both sides arrive at an agreement. And also it worked because afterwards we were not like economically separated in a way that's like, of course there was like a national government deciding about the regions, but the regions were always the regions. So it was always kind of stand apart. But like basically the Czech and Slovak citizens were still able to, with the same passports or same basically IDs, were able to travel between the countries, to get employed in either country, to like basically there was no change to the economic arrangement between no significant change for travel or for business between the two countries. It was just really just political separation because of political differences. So I think that's why it worked. That's like a big part of why it worked, I believe.
Yeah, and I think as long as it's clear what you're doing and why you're doing it, and there's options for people, that people aren't like when they separated East and West Germany, they just threw up the wall there and separated families. Like that kind of a separation, in my mind, again, dystopian and negative. And I would, but I don't mind with people trying to form their own countries or their own, let's just call them intentional communities. In some ways, you're trying to make a huge intentional community out of New Hampshire with this, no positive rights, and I'm okay with that on a worldwide level, as long as you're not causing problems for people and enslaving people and saying, okay, you have nowhere to go now, take a pill.
So just basically what I would say then is that what you would need for that to work in the United States of America is that like you basically need to cut some sort of deal with the government of the United States of America that
absolutely.
That side of the equation is okay with, and that then as a follow-up it would be open borders, and it would be like a business that would be like you could be like go to do business from one country to the other. Like if you could make this kind of deal in a way that the United States of America, the rest of it would be okay with, then of course it could work. It's just the question is like what you offer the federal government that would make it accept this arrangement.
For example, if you were to offer to say pay off a certain amount of national debt, whatever New Hampshire's portion would be, maybe a little bit extra or something, just as a sweeten the deal. Maybe some kind of economic deal could be made there, perhaps, if you had enough wealthy people how much you're willing to pay to kind of get out of your income tax obligations to the U.S. or whatever it might be. It's potentially something you could negotiate on, and I'd love to see those kinds of negotiations happen on any level.
So Stephen, do you have some ideas on like how to make that kind of deal happen?
I think we need to push. I mean, you all are familiar with the United Nations and their idea of the right of self-determination. Another way of phrasing that is, and that's what we say in the manifesto, is consent of the governed. That when the federal government no longer has the consent of the governed, it becomes uncivilized for them to continue governing there. So I would say that's what we want to do. We want to get the American people to be on board with that idea that consent of the governed still means something, and when you no longer have the consent of the governed, it's time to start negotiating.
How far along are you, Stephen? How many people? I mean, if you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, we're still not a whole lot. It's
just getting started.
It's basically a very small number of people who are. Again, most libertarians, they've heard the idea and they think it's great, but they say it's a pipe dream. You'll never get the kind of negotiated secession that you want.
Makes sense. How many libertarians would you say there are that would be interested in this, that you kind of have to connect to and say, hey, move to New Hampshire, let's make
well, Club 75 is 40 or so million people.
Well, yeah, a small number of them would be actual libertarians, probably, but
again, they may not realize that they are libertarians. They might not even be libertarian. All we ask of them is that they not like income tax and be willing to opt out of positive rights.
The positive rights one might be
this makes sense. Like like in terms of like political science, like this kind of reasoning, I believe makes sense. That you identify a group that you believe you can persuade. That makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, I'd love to see the numbers, and I'd love to see kind of how many people. For myself, I'm kind of a fan of positive rights to some extent, and I'm willing to pay a certain amount of income tax. In Canada, we have healthcare, free healthcare. It's not perfect, but I think it's a lot better than the States, just from my own personal experience. My mom, had cancer for a while, and benefited very much from Canadian healthcare system, not having to pay hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. My dad was a doctor himself, very supportive of the Canadian healthcare system in some ways. So there's always issues, but I do think that the option for people to have access to healthcare, no matter what their background is, I think is in general a good thing. Most Canadians agree.
So just maybe nice a question for Stephen. So what do you specifically think? Like, how do you specifically think healthcare would work in your version of the state?
It's a free market healthcare thing.
So it'd just be private insurance, similar to how the States is now, right? Just private insurance without Obamacare.
Well, prior to Obamacare.
Prior to Obamacare, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's ups and downs, and definitely we could have a whole multi-hour debate about healthcare.
That's a whole other debate on its own. Yeah.
But it's interesting. But again, it comes down to people who are willing to give those up, get them all into one spot, and see how it goes. I'd love to see that experiment unfold. And not have it come to some kind of war or problem or insurrection.
Maybe another question for Stephen in the same vein. So what is actually your opinion on like how education should work? Because personally, I very much believe that the sort of socialized healthcare makes a lot of sense. I'm actually increasingly less and less convinced that sort of socialized education makes as much sense as the healthcare thing, because of like there's things that it's sort of just because government is doing it, it has like a certain kind of influence on the content and style of education, which I believe isn't very constructive. So I'm actually personally much more open to alternative solutions in this area. So in your view, what like a libertarian education should look like?
Okay. First of all, no mandatory education. It would be private. Actually, the current public schools would be gradually transitioning to becoming private schools. So the loyalists can send their kids to a public school with no charge. A secessionist can still send their kids to public school, but they have to pay tuition. And so gradually they would become private schools.
Yeah. So if people wanted to homeschool their kids,
absolutely,
that's an option. Or not.
And many people do.
That's an option for the parents to just educate their kids however they see fit and pay for that education. And that's just part of the requirement of becoming a parent, is that you provide education to your kids in whatever way you see fit.
In fact, speaking of education, I think one of the key, like, I don't know what I want to make it a legal requirement, but a moral requirement of secessionists is that they teach their children about other countries and say, look, you were just born here. As Martin says, it wasn't your choice. Maybe you are not a libertarian. Go look at these other countries. And if that looks attractive to you, start now thinking about moving there.
Yeah. And Martin and I are obviously pretty big fans in some kind of a world education kind of open source platform where, we're seeing a lot more of these open source things. Khan Academy is a really great one, that are just kind of making all kinds of education from kindergarten to 12 and then even university essentially free for anybody.
But importantly, voluntary and decentralized as like the main core attributes of it.
Yeah, the alternative world education is something with the nickname AWE. We're in awe of alternative world education. To just create a better system for anyone worldwide with the internet as it is. And
let me just ask you, how do you feel about Wikipedia? Honestly, I think you can learn an awful lot just through Wikipedia, and it's of course completely free. And if that is one thing that I really love to donate to.
I absolutely love Wikipedia. Yeah, and I absolutely love any kind of open source platform that's not pushing any one thing, that it's kind of open for anyone to contribute to, and you can kind of take it as is. there's definitely things on there that aren't 100% correct all the time, but I think it's as far as most of it, it's very close. Very good.
Like personally, because like education is actually a big part of my background, so I'm really thinking about it in very practical terms because I'm trying to personally develop solutions in this area. So I'm actually trying to be extremely critical of everything. Wikipedia, I believe, is a good start, and is an interesting proof of concept for a thing that like you can have open source, globally like decentralized platforms with some sort of learning potential. That in terms of Wikipedia, I just think like they made some maybe not ideal structural decisions, which cause that like some topics are or can be hijacked by very politically motivated groups, but that's sort of technical minutia. That's like just the specifics of the editorial process as it's like set up on the platform that you could do differently on an open source platform and maybe have different results overall. But in terms of the accuracy, that's actually very sort of positive finding, because actually that was told to me. I actually studied the journalism that I studied at Masaryk University in Brno was specialized in media and communication theory. So I was like trying to look at the systems like from a higher level. And one of the professors there, and in Czech Republic, actually, when you're a professor, it means like you have a special higher status. That's like an earned title. It's not just because you teach at the university, you're automatically a professor. So this guy was the professor. It was like the one that's like the highest ranked academically at that institution in that field. And basically, he told me at the time where everybody sort of was trendy in the academia to hate on Wikipedia. But he told me that like no, it's like if you just think about it, just because you like have like if you like a professionally edited dictionary, then you have like maybe 20-30 authors that do the sort of correcting of the facts and stuff. On Wikipedia, if it's a topic that people care about, you can have like 10,000 people looking at a thing, and that's just statistically results in at least comparable levels of precision that like a few absolute experts could do. That is actually, there's this thing called wisdom of the crowds, where if you sort of average inputs from a large number of non-experts, it actually performs as well or outperforms small groups of experts if it's about determining facts. So that's an actual, like I said, interesting proof of concept, and I believe like a lot more can be done in this area that doesn't require national governments, or definitely doesn't have to be mandatory, in my opinion.
Okay. Excellent. So I wanted to kind of wrap up soon. Didn't want to keep Stephen here all day, but thanks so much for joining us here today. Martin, is there any final comments, or Stephen, any final questions or comments you'd like to make to our viewers today before we start to wrap things up?
Yeah, so maybe Stephen, if you have, I guess just to be clear.
I don't know if I have any final things. I mean, we haven't really talked about national defense.
Okay.
Oh,
that's like another. We could go on for an hour about that. As I mentioned in the manifesto, there's three options there. There's the well, let's just have our own army, like Estonia does. There's try to work something out with the United States, which is what Monaco does with France. And then the final option is to just have no army at all, which is what Costa Rica does. Right. I personally prefer option 3, but that brings up, if you want to think of it as another like tragedy of the commons, somebody has to watch out for the Hitlers of the world. And how do you do that? And that's where I hope that someday the United Nations can do its stated job. And obviously they failed to deal with the Ukraine situation, and they failed to deal with the Israel and Gaza situation. But maybe someday they can be an effective.
I 100% agree. We need some kind of reformed UN to actually stop these world conflicts before they start, you know. And
so you're a libertarian who supports global military.
Essentially, yes. No, thinking of it as a commons thing. Somebody has to do it, and it should be. It shouldn't be just one country playing policeman for the world, which is what we basically have now.
Right.
It should be a global organization that emphasizes mediation and arbitration first, and only goes to war as a last resort.
Would you be okay with New Hampshire supporting a global organization like that by committing, 2% of your property taxes or something like that?
So once again, we've realized that we need Starfleet.
Something like that. Now, most libertarians would disagree with me. A lot of libertarians want to have nothing to do with the UN, so it's going to take some persuasion.
Yeah, and although even I have to say, you're definitely you're definitely unique among libertarians I've met, and
Okay.
it's a breath of fresh air for me to kind of talk with you and kind of see
Okay.
that you're much more, in many ways, down to earth,
Okay.
than many many libertarians I've talked to. And I love the concepts. I love the things we've talked about today. So Martin, you were going to say something there.
Well, just it actually in classical libertarianism from authors like Nozick, I think there could be some agreement between libertarians that at least you need like a defense thing. Like that's the notion is minimal state, and the question is what level of state is minimal necessary level of state. And I think like the answer of like even many libertarians to that could be that, well, we probably should have some sort of defense thing going on because we need to keep existing. So I think like actually that might work.
Yeah, and the global military could also do things like global pollution control at the same time
Okay.
to ensure that countries aren't exporting their nuclear waste or just completely making the oceans unlivable for our fish and things like that.
Yeah,
right?
so we also need the Captain Planet and Planeteers.
Yeah, we definitely need some kind of worldwide cooperation on that in the future. And I think the COP28, we're heading in that direction. It's taken us 28 years of negotiations, but we're getting there little by little by little. And I'm definitely very hopeful that the internet will bring us there as people see what's going on in the world more. We're more connected with our neighbors. We've got friends all over the world now. We can see them face to face, get all these different perspectives together. I think we're being more open-minded to the inclusionary aspects of global cooperation. Let's just say maybe not global government, but global cooperation towards these global problems. And I hope the libertarians agree with that kind of a concept, and that we can get the ones that are the holdouts to actually see that cooperation is better than non-cooperation in many cases.
Right.
Particularly for global military conflict and global pollution conflict. So we are making good progress on that, and I hope to continue to see more progress from people like you, Stephen, as you kind of get the word out there for what you're trying to do. Great, thanks so much for being with us here today, Stephen. Anyone who's interested in learning more about what he's up to, Club 75 Alliance is it .org?
.com.
Club75alliance.com. Check it out, Stephen. Also, just as a quick note. You've been reviewing Jeff Grobert's thing. I noticed you had a podcast on that website where you reviewed the AFIRS, thing, and I really very much enjoyed reading that. I read through the whole thing. It was very, very good review. So anyone who's kind of interested in Jeff Grober's stuff, we've had a few podcasts about that in the past. Check those out if you're curious about what some kind of land-based capitalism might do and how it might tie into some kind of libertarian philosophies. But also how to improve upon whatever anyone else is doing, how to take what they're doing and kind of adopt it in your life in some ways, take all the good, none of the bad, and just try to continue to build each one of us up together so we can kind of have a better personal philosophy on the world and a better global philosophy on how to move forward together. Anything else that we'd like to discuss today? Martin, any final comments from your side?
No, not really. I think Stephen answered all of my questions and asked all kinds of important questions, and it just feels like we should probably talk to him for a couple more hours some other time about some other stuff. I believe there's still a lot to discuss.
There's still a lot there, and I this is kind of just scratching the surface of my brain, but thanks so much, Stephen. You gave some great answers to my questions as well. I can definitely start to imagine how this might work. And I'd like to actually kind of throw out a challenge for all of our viewers, as well as Stephen, to, take everything we've talked about today, maybe go to our website as well, savingtheworldtogether.org, look at our 7 pillars a little bit. Right. Stephen, I'd love to get your feedback on what it is we can do to kind of help move the world to a state where we could have these open borders and have these open kinds of societies. I'd love to get your review on what we're doing and what we can do to kind of help you better and help spread the word better about some of these gaps, some of these problems, like you said, that you've had with other libertarians where they're kind of not really getting the big pictures in some cases. So please check that out. We'd love to have another podcast with you in the future where you maybe bash on us a little bit. We'd love to have your questions come our way.
Luke, do I have your email address? I know you're on Facebook, but I'd love to have just an email address.
Yeah, it's just lukemacmichael@gmail.com.
Okay.
You just go with that one. I'm starting to use that for everything now. It makes sense.
Okay.
We'd love to connect with you again very soon. Please take a look and let us know if there's anything we can do. We also have obviously Project Contributes, the newer project we've started in the last couple months. We've got several other podcasts about that specifically. I think we're on meeting number 8 now, where we're continuing to progress towards some kind of app to find all the answers to all the world's problems. Some kind of global
Well,
collaboration.
mainly for a global collaboration, constructive conversation platform.
Conversations of any kind. So this kind of thing would be something maybe we could get a whole bunch of libertarians together to decide how exactly this might work and what we can focus on to push for this kind of Club 75 Alliance deal in some ways. Anyway, so there's a lot there, and I think there's a lot of potential collaboration we could have. We'd love to have your feedback on anything, and we'd love to help you move forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate everything and appreciate all our viewers. Please leave comments and feedbacks. Connect with us. Let us know what we're doing right and wrong, and tell us where we're wrong, because we want to correct it. We want to get better. And let's save the world together, everybody. Thanks a lot.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.